Okay, so we're going to be having a conversation. If you're joining us here, Todd Boyum is going to be with me, and we're going to have a conversation about the meaning of life and other topics of interest to both of us. So hang on, this is going to be great. It's going to be awesome. I can see we actually have two people that are watching. It might just be you and me. Oh, actually, I don't even know if you've heard this, but I have found like half sisters.
You have found half sisters.
I
Oh,
I
from like genealogy stuff?
like genealogy. So one of my so hi Laura, I see that you're watching. So you might want to disown me after watching this video. But no, I did one of these DNA tests and got a match. Ended up meeting a whole bunch of people. They all live in Richmond, Texas. And then today, we did another DNA test. So the one we did on Ancestry.com, it couldn't tell if we were half siblings or cousins or what. So we did another DNA test, and I discovered that there's a 99.7% chance that I have three half siblings. All of them are sisters. So hi Laura,
Wow.
nice to see you. So I'm getting to. This is a very strange way to
Should,
introduce people to me.
should I congratulate her or
I
tell her I'm sorry or
condolences. They don't really know me yet, so we'll see what happens.
well, I think John's an awesome person. And so for whatever that's worth, you don't
Yeah.
know me, so maybe that's not helpful.
So let me just we'll get started, but let me just provide just a little context. So Todd and I worked together at Dell for several years,
Yeah, for quite a
and
while.
you know, Dell, in terms of sort of my spiritual growth or maturity or life, however you want to put it, Dell was a pretty significant place because, I had to do all this kind of growing and grappling with theology and stuff, and really had the pleasure and privilege to being in an environment with a bunch of people across the Christian spectrum. So it wasn't just a bunch of AG people or Baptist people or whatever. I mean, we had the full spectrum. We had the Catholics, we had the Presbyterians, we had the Baptists, we had the non-denom. So it was this real eclectic group of people, and one of the things that has always been sort of a question in my mind, and I'm going to use somewhat exaggerative terminology. I just want to make a point. I'm not trying to bash or be negative, so forgive me if I'm being a bit boisterous, but I'm trying to make a point. And my understanding of theology is here's how I kind of understood it. Maybe I mistaught it, whatever. But my understanding of theology is the purpose of life is to get saved, and then you need to get baptized in the Holy Ghost. And the purpose of the baptism in the Holy Ghost is to get other people saved so that you will then all go to heaven, which is a good thing. But oh, wait, if you happen to live in the last times, the last days, it's going to really suck because basically the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And so if you're one of the unfortunate people that, live in the end times, basically life sucks for you because the world's just going to go to hell. But that's okay. There will be the giant eject button, and we'll all go poof to heaven. And then it'll really, really, really suck for everyone that's left behind. In fact, that could be like a book, like Left Behind. I watched all the
A
movies,
whole series of books.
a whole. But I was in this in the '70s when it was, A Distant Thunder and Thief in the Night, and
And Al Linden and yeah,
yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, it's going to really suck for everybody left behind, but then Jesus is going to come back and defeat the devil, and then it will all be okay. And I'm actually beginning to sort of understand, I think, how that theology and that doctrine came up, and we can have a conversation about fundamentalism and some of the things that were going on. I think when my stream, so I'm an Assemblies of God preacher's kid for what that's worth, and so I think there were some things that were going on, kind of in culture and society, that there was this really response against it, and I think that's why some of the doctrine um, emphasized the way that it emphasized. But the point is, and this is really what I want to kind of poke your brain on, because this is something you and I have been talking about for
Yeah.
several weeks. Is okay. You, it almost sounds bad, but there has to be more to this life than just get saved and make it to heaven. Like that
Yeah.
seems kind of a to be blunt, that seems like very short-sighted. Like,
Yeah.
okay, maybe my 80, I get it, compared to eternity, my 80 years is a vapor. I get all that, but something's missing. So with that, I'm going to kind of pitch that question to you.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
because you've been doing some blogs and videos and kind of dealing and grappling with this question, and if I'm a heretic, and then all you guys can post comments and say that I'm a heretic, that's fine, and we'll go from there.
Well, I don't know that I think you're a heretic. I think, John, the thing is that we all experience our faith in, a series of little microcosms. You were at Assemblies of God, or other people are at Baptist or whatever, and we experience our faith uh, in in a couple of different ways that are kind of common, but in some ways that are different, right? So, obviously, Assemblies of God have more focus on the Holy Spirit than, say, the Baptists would, but all of them tend to have this focus on it. It starts with, we sinned and we need to be saved from that.
Right.
And that's what a lot of people that are talking about this topic nowadays refer to as the two chapter gospel. But
Okay.
when you read the Bible, there's really sort of four major parts. And the four major parts start with God created everything, and he demonstrated, creation and work, and he wanted to create us in his image, and he called all of that good and us very good, right? And he had this beautiful world with the idea that we would be his image bearers, and that's our purpose, is to be his image bearers in the context of work. Like, religion
Or
doesn't even,
creation.
yeah, co-creation, right? He didn't create music, he created sound, and he left music for us to create. He left all of the things that we do with his creation to take it further, intentionally for his children, us, to process. Now, then, yes, chapter 3 comes along. Like every good story, there has to be an antagonist. And sin enters the world.
Right.
And so now we have this challenge that, God has to come back and redeem us from, which is part 3, our way of being redeemed. And there's a lot to say about all of these parts. And then the fourth part is that we are left here intentionally, and Jesus makes it very clear that it's intentional, to continue to co-create, to continue to innovate, to continue to restore the world with him, in partnership with him, as co-heirs, as brothers and sisters with him, as other children of God. And when you start with this 2 chapter, and it's all about you sin and you need to get saved, well, you've left out some of the most significant
It,
parts about what we're supposed to do here.
right.
And not
Right.
only that, you've made the beginning story be all about sin and moral failure, which isn't really what God's about. He's not about our moral failure. He loves us. He wants us. We're separated from him, not by our failure, but by the fact that this outside force of sin entered the world and is unfortunately, corrupted things. And God has actually provided the solution to that. So just like he created us and provided all of the ability for us to be uniquely um, delivering how what we are uniquely supposed to be creating in the world with him, each of us. He's not asking us to be all absorbed into him, but he loves all of our uniqueness, and he wants us to all find with him the unique purpose we have and create that. And that's what we all have in common. It's called common grace. But we also have this common grace of Christ died for us, not just so that we could be justified.
Right.
But more
Which is a big
importantly,
important part.
which is super
Huge,
important.
huge.
But what the church teaches, it's all about this justification so you can go to heaven.
Right.
It's actually about being realigned with him so he can be our life instead of the self life we chose with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right?
Right.
The erroneous knowledge of good and evil, as one of my mentors used to say. The other option was to have the tree of life. That would have been to have Christ as our life. And so what he's really doing is making it possible for Christ to be our life. And
Right.
then he's saying, good, you're free now. Go and partner with me. You will no longer have to be separated anymore. Because really what sin did was separate us. It's not so much about good and bad as it is about separate versus integrated with him.
Together.
And what we have in that redemption is the ability for us to really understand our true identity. So there's two big things. What's our true identity? Christ can be our true identity, and we can have fellowship, full fellowship with God. And the second thing is we can be a part of the purpose of God, which is, well, what's God's purpose? Is to continue to bring this restoration about of his grand plan to have heaven and earth together,
So
right?
let's
That's why we
let's
pray, thy will be done on earth as it is in
right.
heaven. Go
And
ahead.
let's just, I mean, let's kind of experiment. I know I was being a little bit
Sure. Yeah,
bombastic in my
sure.
intro, but this is really, I mean, ultimately, this is why I think this mindset or this philosophy or theology is really important, because if you do kind of boil it down, okay, there is a tendency, if you sort of accept the hell in a handbasket philosophy, then there is a tendency to disengage from society, okay, or maybe only focus on what we would call the religion or the church or salvation or whatever, and completely step away from the rest of culture, okay. And then on the other hand, if you not only accept that there's more to this life than just being saved, but actually the world is to be redeemed. And what that means is another story. But if if you say, okay, let's just think, if the premise is God's kingdom on earth, and I can have a piece to that's a different mindset. I mean, at least for me, it sort
Totally
of
different mindset.
motivates me to be engaged and to do something in this life and leave a legacy, which is actually sort of funny to kind of be talking that, because as I've been meeting all these new family members, I mean, my head is very much into leaving a legacy. I mean,
Sure.
that's where I'm at. So what are your thoughts?
No, I mean, I think you're right on, because when you have the 2 chapter version, well, okay, I'm redeemed, and now I guess I just do the best I can to struggle through this world, and because what's really going to be great is when we get to heaven, as opposed to the fact that really, even though we can't completely see it, we see it as a glass darkly now, as a mirror darkly.
Yeah.
Uh, God's about making that fusion happen now. And yes, it's going to happen more fully in the future, but he's asking us to be a part of it right now, right? To rule right here, even though we are in the midst of enemies, not people,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but the fact that Satan hasn't been fully chained yet, right?
Right.
And so you're right. It should, if you realize that every bit of your work has the potential for being transformed and redeemed, and to push out into eternity, then that's a very different thing than, well, I got saved and now I'm just hoping I be a pretty good person until I die, right?
Right.
No, it's like you have freedom, you have complete freedom,
Right.
because Christ has already done the work of redeeming you and making you in alignment with God. Now pursue that, continue to pursue that in all of your work, in everything you do. Ask him to take part of that, part in that with you, and go co-create with him in freedom.
Yeah.
In freedom.
Yeah. In
Not because you
freedom.
have to do something to gain him, but because you've already gained him and you're free to go and love.
So
That's a very different thing.
taking a step back,
Mhm.
Okay, you and I were at Dell. We were doing the Dell thing.
Doing the Dell thing.
Doing the Dell thing. If there's any Dell friends here, hi. Um,
Hello.
how did you kind of come into this? For me, I kind of was attracted into this through what's been called the seven mountains or the seven spheres of influence. I think you came
Yeah.
in sort of a slightly different route, what was your process? What were you, for me, it was all about having a holistic life, right? I didn't want to have my Dell hat and my family hat and my church hat. So it was all
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
how do I integrate my life?
Well,
What
I think I've
motivated you to pursue this thought?
yeah, no, I think I've always been on that journey, right? I mean, I came to Christ as a young person. I mean, I grew up Catholic, but when I found Christ on my own, my first take was, well, I guess I got to go be a minister, and that just seemed like the logical thing to do.
Right.
And I kind of pursued that for a while, and I really felt God telling me that for me that was going to be in the context of work and family, and I was like, okay, well, great. And so I ended up, I love technology, and I found my way into technology, and that got me on at Dell. And, um, but I had always kind of pursued sort of personal development and my faith, and those two kind of interwove with each other. And I would always see personal development things, but to me, they would always show up like somebody would say, hey, this is the way something is. And I would see how that principle lined up with something that God gave. Now, the other thing that happened for me about that time is I really found some mentors who really began to talk about the exchanged life message, how what Christ was really doing, what we're really having when we get saved, what it means to be born again is that literally our spirit dies, if you would, right? We're buried with him and we're resurrected with him, and he's really your life,
Right.
and not some distant God that's up and that's indifferent and not connected to you, but a very intimate relationship with you. And that really began to grapple with me over time. And so, but you're right, I found it very difficult to figure out, but okay, how do I do this at work, and
Yeah.
so sure, I'd learn things from church, and I'd try. And I did a lot of things at work that I don't necessarily recommend necessarily the primary ways to go. You people are like, oh, if I'm going to be a Christian at work, I need to put my Bible or put John 3:16. And I did a lot of these kinds of things because there was nobody helping me see how do you actually, what does it mean to be a Christian in your work context? Because,
Right.
the churches don't really talk about that.
Right.
And work doesn't talk about that. So where do you learn that? Where does somebody tell you how do we let God come out of us in work? And so he taught me lots of things during the course of time. And many years ago, started giving me this vision of, helping people with this topic. And over the last several years, it's just taught me tons and tons and tons about it. And so I'm finding that there's two main things that I feel like are mostly missing in our church world that impact our day-to-day life world. One is a true understanding of identity in
Yeah.
Christ.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that God
Ho-
intends
ho-
for us
I,
to
I,
be a part of
I've
all of our
I've
work life.
I've got to jump in, and
Yeah, yeah.
because this is so, again, like, relevant to me is identity, right? So, I mean, I've already kind
Yes.
of shared publicly, but you know, I'm the product of an affair, and I think I can say that now public. Well, I just did, but I think I have everyone's permission to. It's very obvious, and yet, number one, there's two things that have been really obvious to me. Um, my father, very very loved by his family, which, sometimes we kind of like, oh, you're, oh, you've sinned, you've done this bad thing. But here really comes the identity, and this is something that I'm really, even to a deeper sense, getting a hold of, is when our identity is in Christ, we are truly a masterpiece. And it doesn't matter what the circumstances of our birth, what our past, what our whatever is. And I mean, that's so freeing, and it's so liberating when I do that. So I wanted to really just kind of like pound on this identity, 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 identity. Because I really do think, if you go back to the garden, right? I mean, it was, it was all this questioning your identity, questioning what God said, questioning who God is. I mean, that's really what the first lie is kind of all about. You will
It's
be like
totally about
God,
that.
you know.
It's
Your
totally about
identity is
that.
this. When God was saying, "You are my creation, and you're my loved," and all this, and well, no, I want to be like, I want to be God Himself, and from the very beginning, it's all an attack on our identity.
It
Um,
is.
so I wanted to like pound that
It,
home.
and that's actually very much what the course I'm working on is trying to overcome those lies, because in just these few words, in fact, in one sense, in just one word, by including the word not, Satan turns everything he talks about into a lie.
Yeah,
And in that lie, he lies about God. He lies about us. He lies about our relationships. He lies about himself. And he lies about the nature of reality in such a way that we think that we're getting self,
yeah,
right? We're not really getting self, right? We're really getting removed from our design's ability to have a relationship with God that's true and deep and meaningful, and that completes us, because we were designed to have God be a part of our life. We weren't designed to, go off on our own. And so, one way I've heard people talk about it is, you know, there's no way you can possibly imagine a better future for yourself, a better purpose for yourself than the one that God has in mind for you.
right,
Right. And so, therefore, everything we're doing that we're kind of doing it independently is not actually really connecting to our truest self.
right,
It's not actually getting to authenticity, and it is still being caught up with this lie. And so, how do you overcome that? And the first thing is to realize that, it's not about good and bad. It's not about morality. It's about this separation lie that Satan tells us. And one of the things I love is he tells it to us two ways. This is how you can hear him, right? One thing is, oh, you want this thing that's really something less,
right,
right? And so then you take that, right? So you go, oh, yeah, I want that, right? And then he goes, oh, you're so horrible. God will never take you back,
right,
right? And
right. But
so what he's
it's
doing is he's
the
saying,
tricky one
first, I'm going to
is now
tempt
he's
you
going to
to be,
bash you, right,
yeah, first, I'm going to tempt you to be separate again.
right,
And then I'm going to go, see, you're always going to be separate because God, and that's the two-prong lie that he tells,
yeah,
right? And it's all about keeping you being separate, but he makes that sound like the voice in your own head.
right,
Like, because he wants to pretend like he's not even around, right?
right,
It's all you. You're a failure. You're a moral failure. Blah blah blah. No, it's actually that this external force called sin is in the world impacting us, and God doesn't care. He still loves us, and He's already paid for that. He did that before the foundation of the world, and so we can come back anytime we want and just quit believing in that garbage.
yeah,
And that's really what he's asking us to do. It's really that simple. And people get so caught up because the church makes it, and this is another, we were talking earlier about the problem with that 2-chapter version. It creates an us versus them thing too, right? One thing is, oh, we're saved, now I'm just waiting, right? I have nothing to do, which is not really true. And then the
right,
second thing is it makes us do this crazy us versus them thing where, well, I'm saved and you're not. And it's like, look, God's will is that every single person knows that he loves them and that they can have a relationship with them and be their most complete self.
right,
And we don't have to have an us versus them,
right.
right?
But,
And so we just beat people up, and it's horrible.
and even what you just said, right? I mean, again, this is why I think this kind of exercise is important, because if we actually understand my best self, and look, the world talks about that. I can go
All
I
the
can go
time.
see all the TED talks.
Yep.
I mean, this boggles my mind. Like we actually do have the solution to
Yes, we do.
the best self. Okay. And I mean, I could go on a little tangent here about you've got to love your neighbor as yourself, and I do think that there is this diminishing ourself that we sometimes get. But the church has this great answer about being the best self. And also, if we again truly believe that, and this is not being about hedonistic, or
Nope.
that if you think that's what we're talking, then uh, I probably,
Sorry.
there's nothing I can do, right? If
There's
that's
nothing we
what you
can
get out
contribute
of this
except give us some ideas.
conversation, I don't know what to tell you. Well, watch it again. But if we're truly our best self, then by definition, that should have significant impact
Absolutely.
on our surroundings. It should have significant impact on our family. It should have significant impact in our work and the places that we spend time in. It should have, it should have significant impact on our world. And here's where I do think, you kind of have to look in and make an assessment and go, yeah, I'm not seeing the significant impact. So I I I must not be being my best self, right? I mean, I'm a personal responsibility, but I think there's another step that we're not we're not doing what God created us to do. Um, so you've taken some people, and I mean, you've got a kind of an outline and an exercise. What does that look like? And by the way, I see that we got some folks here, and so again, hi, new family. This is awesome. So if you have a question, if you find this topic interesting,
Tell us.
write a question. We'll be here all night on it. Uh,
We could go on forever on this topic, couldn't we?
If we could, what are some things? While you're telling us what you've done, I'll preview the questions that we have in here and
Yeah.
and see if there's anything interesting.
Well, for the most part, I coach people, and of course, everybody that's trying to get coached is trying to accelerate. They're trying to have bigger impact. They're trying to do bigger things, and to the extent that they're following any principle, I have a particular modality that I'm trained in that's scientifically based on high performance, which is great. But what I find is anything that's a principle that actually really works in the world, somebody might have discovered it or proven it by doing surveys and research, which is exactly what the case is here. But that principle is God's principle. It's connected to Him. But the principles are just a piece of the puzzle, right? Like if you have the principles of God, but you don't have God, you're still missing a whole bunch of what you can bring to the table. It's like saying, I'm going to take my body and my strength. My daughter, Bethany, is a CrossFit athlete. She's the eighth fittest person in the world, female in the world right now. Right.
Wow.
But she would be the first to tell you that part of that training is about mental. It's not about just physical. Right. And so you can't just bring your physicality to the world. Your mental actually has way more power than your physicality. We can't lift things that, some of the dumbest beasts on the world can lift. But just like our mental capability is profound, it's nothing compared to what God can bring to the table, right? And so it's a whole nother thing when you bring faith to it. And so what I have been working on
And
is
hold on,
trying to
because
bring
see,
that
I'm
to it.
sitting. Let me tell you the story that's going on in my head.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
story that's going on in my head right now is, oh wait, we're trying to make God Santa Claus. But
Yeah, no.
but that's I mean, I can
But you could.
hear it in my head, but
Yeah.
yet I mean, God did this, right? I mean, He
God did
wanted
this.
to be that to be connected. He wanted to be one. He wanted to
Yeah.
live in us. He wanted us to be His temple. And yet we hear stuff like this and we're like, oh, you're just making God Santa Claus.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
God
Yeah.
created us to be a living temple for Him to inhabit. And I don't think He just wanted to sit on his lazy boy and watch TV inside of his house.
I love that you brought that up. I was at a men's thing a couple of weeks ago, and it was pretty good. They were talking about, the particular topic was about how sin and how it affects us. And I'm kind of auditing still this course about whether or not it's really going to be about, religious men, like bringing themselves to the table, or if they're really realizing that they can't possibly bring themselves to the table. Because the reality is without God, we're hopeless, right?
Right.
We have to get there. So I've been auditing this course, but it was pretty good. And we were talking about it in the small group afterwards. And I was listening to everybody else first, because I like to just hear where people are. And I finally brought up, I said, the one thing, all of these things were really, really good. And it was kind of breaking out those lies that Satan was telling us. But I was pointing out that at the end, when we go and hide, right? Because what this guy had said is that, you see something, you want it, you take it, which is the sin,
Right.
and then you go hide.
Right.
And 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 I was going to say, well, actually, there's a second sin that you stay hiding. The point we were making a while ago, right? Like
Right.
Satan gets you to do it, but then he gets you to stay separate, which
Right.
is a secondary sin. It means both cases you don't trust God. I don't trust God to give it to me the right way, and then I'm not going to trust that He's going to still love me after I've done the wrong thing,
Right.
right? So in both cases, I'm saying, no, I don't trust you, God. I'm going to go my own way, right? And so I bring that up. And the very first question the very first statement somebody makes is, well, yeah, but yeah, we have freedom, but you got to not do and I'm like, first off, I'm not even talking about legalism versus license, right?
Right.
I'm talking
Right.
about two ways that Satan gets us. And you're immediately thinking I'm going to like, oh, we can just go do anything, right?
Right.
And so we have this kind of crazy mindset that says, oh, well, the grace of God is good as long as you're doing the right things. But then,
Right.
because He wouldn't really want to give you grace if you weren't. And it's
Right.
like, no,
And I
you
think
are absolutely not understanding grace when you say that.
this is where I also think it's kind of important to sort of know our own churches or flavors history, because a lot of what was
Right.
going on sort of at the turn of the last century, right? The late 1800s and stuff, when kind of fundamentalism and Pentecostal and some of these new denominations were coming out. I mean, a lot of what was going on was a response to some very wrong doctrine.
Yes.
Jesus was not God. Sin doesn't matter. The resurrection is not true. And
Yes.
and so a lot of, you know, I'll use what's in our, since this is on my head, what's in our DNA, right? What's in our
Yes.
spiritual
DNA.
heritage,
Yes.
our spiritual
Hmm.
DNA
Yep.
is a lot of this sort of, response against heresy. I mean, truly bad doctrine. And again, I get it. I understand why we kind of are there, but we need to complete the picture, and the picture isn't, God's grace is just for you when you do the right thing. Okay. God's grace is with you. His love is with you. His desire to be with you is there always, and He's constantly calling us to participate with Him.
Well, this is where I love your Seven Peaks stuff, by the
Yeah.
way, because I think, there's sort of two ways to approach God: what you can know about Him, right, and then what you can't know about Him, right? Like, how do you take and deal with the mystery of God too? And there were sort of two approaches. One is this learning, affirmative way, and the other is this sort of negative way that's kind of that one. And in fact, the theologians that thought about that said that really the affirmative way is only good sort of for beginners.
Right.
And I think part of the reason that that's true is that you have to separate all of your culture from what it is to be His.
Yeah.
And that culture can come from, the American idea of independence.
Wow.
For instance, and
And
which
we
I
think
love.
about it.
I'm
We talk
American.
about Abram, right? The father of the faith. I mean, he literally was taken from his cult, the Ur of Chaldeans, right? And
Yeah.
he's placed, boom, no cultural context,
Right.
or completely alien cultural context.
Yep.
And I think you've hit on something that,
Well, but it's the same with church culture,
yeah,
right? And church culture has gone, because you're right. When you look at that, it's hard to separate all of that DNA, but there's a lot of it. For instance, the 2-chapter gospel is actually a response to the Enlightenment time period, right? Because the Enlightenment time period, Kant and others came out and said, hey, things that can be proven and are scientific, we should talk about in public. And things that are just your opinion or your theology should not.
right,
It's kind of where we get this idea of, never speak about religion or
right,
politics, and,
right,
because they can't be proven. That's just your opinion, right?
right,
Well, first off, that isn't really true. But what the revivalists did is they tried to just say, well, great, then you should focus on purely the spiritual side of the world.
Right.
Right. And let's make it simpler for you. You're bad and you need to be saved.
Right.
And they left out the rest. And so all of the work that, that came out of the Protestant Reformation with Luther and Calvin, that really had a very powerful work-life theology, right? That actually has impacted all of the culture we've inherited, by the way, the Protestant work ethic, right? Was lost.
Yes.
And so even though you're from Assembly of God, and I've been in other kinds of things, I've done some with Assembly of God too, but
we're good people. We
that
welcome
we
everybody.
We're
good people.
We're all good. But all of us in the modern Christian culture have pretty much forgotten about the 4-chapter gospel.
Yeah.
Like very few people have been talking about that. They all start with, oh, you need to be saved, right? Because you're bad. Instead of, no, you're great and you're good in God, but fortunately, this enemy we have has messed that up, but God loves you enough to redeem that for you. And he wants you back.
Yeah. All right. I've got a question. So I'm gonna read this question that we have, and let's see what our response is for it. Hopefully I haven't lost you on Zoom because you look frozen on my side.
But they just taught that we got here. Are you my president?
Oh,
I wasn't president on my side.
No, you're back. I'm gonna read a question, okay?
Sure.
So this is actually what I was hoping for, is that some people would actually write questions and we would have a dialogue. So,
amen.
Miguel says, sorry, I just joined, may have missed this. From your perspective, is the Great Commission a universal purpose for Christians, knowing that doing this is not necessary for our salvation, as it is by grace that we've been saved and not by our works?
Yeah, that's right.
And
yeah.
And so,
well,
let me give, and maybe while I'm doing, you can pull it up so you can see the context. But I think my answer to you, Miguel, is the Great Commission is a universal purpose. Yes, God came to seek and save the lost. But two things. One, if you look at the Great Commission, he talks about making disciples of nations. And I could have a whole nother thought, but I'll simply say that the Great Commission is all about the salvation of culture, the redemption of culture. Now, I would argue that you cannot influence culture without influencing individuals. But I think that there is a mindset here that we are, we're more than just everybody gets their get out of jail free card, their go to heaven card. I think that the universal purpose of the Great Commission is more than we all go to heaven. And by the way, that's great, right? I mean, I'm not in any way de-emphasizing how absolutely wonderful our blessed hope is. But I think that it's more than that. And so knowing that doing this is not necessary for our salvation, correct. Nothing that we're talking about here is a works-based to our salvation. Our salvation, is what Christ did for us on the cross. Okay. Yeah. I didn't have anything to do with it. I can be the thief on the cross and take my last breath and die right after salvation. I still get my ticket punched. Okay. But I think what Todd and I are really talking about is, okay, now that we are reborn, now that we are alive, we were once dead and now that we're alive, even in this brief moment, this hevel, this meaningless mist of life, is there some meaning to it? And I think that's where I would say I would say yes. Going beyond, co-creating with God in the way that He designed you to be, to do the things that He designed you to do, is extremely important. And I would say, I would say that if the kingdom of God is going to come to earth, earth should look a whole lot different than what it looks like now. And the only people to blame for that are Christ followers. So if Christ followers are not bringing the kingdom and haven't changed their world, and I'm all for start small. I'm all for start yourself, start your family. I get it. But uh, the only people that we have to blame, and this I'll go back to my, oh, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Well, the only reason the world's going to hell in a handbasket, in my humble opinion, is because Christ followers are not
Abdicated.
bringing the kingdom of heaven into earth.
Yes. We should be bringing environments of love and grace.
Yes.
But what we bring most of the time is condemnation and moral judgment and all kinds of other stuff that confuses people
Or
and isn't
Lucy
really what
Gray.
God's about.
Or all dogs go to heaven grace. Hey, yeah, we
Yeah.
can live this lascivious. I don't know what that word is, but we can, we can keep
Glad
on.
you tried it, not me.
I tried it 3 times and it never worked. But we call love and acceptance
Right.
a very non-biblical view of love and acceptance.
Yeah. Clearly that's not what God means, right? It doesn't mean less,
Yeah.
right? God's love is never less. It's always more. It's always more rich. But the reason we head for lesser things is because we just don't believe him. We don't we don't trust it.
Well, it goes back to that lie, right? It goes back to
Yes.
that plant in our head of, you can read the whole C.S. Lewis. I love Screw Tape Letters by C.S.
It's
Lewis.
all about this. A fantastic book. Anybody
Yeah.
that read that should read
Everyone,
that.
that's required reading from everybody, is you've got to read Screw Tape Letters, because he talks about, okay, if I do get you saved, okay, you're going to heaven, then the next best thing that I can do
It's just mess with you,
is just mess with you, and primarily just mess with you by just,
making you ineffective.
making you essentially ineffective, mediocre, not really moving the needle on anything, just kind of going with the flow. Maybe you'll go to heaven, but nothing else is going to happen.
John, hey, what I want to say, just hearing you talk about that, like, first off, I'm glad you talked about the nations part. And I know if you ever want to really see what the Great Commission is, talk to John about what it means to baptize nations and be disciples to nations. But I think that the other thing that I was hearing you say is you're talking about, and I think we could have this danger where people are hearing us talk and we're talking generally. And so they think that, oh, well, we just mean the same things. Like when we say be your best self and all this kind of stuff, I actually mean be your specific, unique,
Yes.
best self,
Yes.
as God designed you. Miguel, for you. And I'm so glad you joined us, by the way, Miguel.
Yeah.
Or Crystal or whoever, right? The point is God did not, we are not a faith where all of the melding, we all just are one universal pantheistic, God's just absorbing us.
Right.
He didn't want that. He made us unique, and we have a unique and powerful gift to bring to the world. And we're pretty good in the common grace space, right?
Right.
That people do amazing things just out of their own unique strength in common grace.
Right.
However,
I think, look at
it's so much more
Elon
when we can
Musk.
connect with him.
Yes. Look at Elon Musk. I don't think there's any question that Elon Musk is operating in his unique God-given gifts, whether he knows it or, clearly he doesn't acknowledge it in any way, but I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that he's operating in something God-given. And here's the other thing, sort of the, be that unique version of you. And I'll use this as an example. Growing up into the 80s, it was let's go have, Christian rock and, Christian music and Christian movies.
Yes.
And it was like, they were horrible because they were copies.
Yeah. And
Some
Andy
of them was pretty good.
Crouch,
Resurrection Band was pretty good. There were a couple, but
yeah. Andy Crouch speaks a lot on this topic, and he says that here's what Christians do, right? We either, basically condemn culture, right? We condemn it.
Yeah.
Or we critique it.
Right.
Well, okay, I'm not condemning it, but it's important for us to go and critique it and see if it's good or not.
Right.
right? And or
I mean,
then
we do want to have
we
a little
copy
bit
it.
of
We
discernment and assessment,
so we copy it. We make the Christian version of it,
right?
and or we just give up and we just consume it.
Yeah.
And instead of doing what we're called to do and be co-creators and create, right? And that's the point. That's really what it is for me, right? You getting back to what you talked about earlier, John, is I've always been struggling trying to figure out how to do this, and I've just made it sort of be my mission that how do you actually start to figure out how to do that? What I found was that I while I was learning amazingly wonderful things from my faith and journey and from church, and I learned amazing things from the world, nobody's really teaching me how those things come together in your day-to-day life, right? The church is focused on the gospel, businesses are focused on making money. God wants something different than those two things,
Yes. Yeah.
right? That are
And
more rich. It includes those things, but
yeah,
is more.
more.
And I just think that you have to start asking yourself the question, what would being a distinctly Christian worker and in person in the world mean,
Mhm.
right? And it can't just mean that you're trying to be good quality wise, because there's lots of people that are doing that, right?
Right.
But it can't be that God didn't make all of us to be preachers and pastors.
Yeah.
That's and it's not higher. I mean, the church, this implementation of the division between the spiritual and the secular has this sort of subtle thing where, well, unless you're in full-time ministry,
Right.
then you're really not doing very much for the faith.
Right,
It's
right.
just not true
This
at
whole
all.
dichotomy of the clergy and the laity, and it's
Yes,
like, no,
totally
there's
not
one.
scriptural at all,
Yes.
not what God's talking about at all. So you've got to remove all of those cultures. Just like we were saying, you have to get over cultures. You have to get over what's not really true that comes from your church too, right?
Right.
And I'm not talking about a specific church. I'm talking about the church, right? You're getting a message that sacred is better than secular.
Right. It's not. And
That's not scriptural.
something else that I
God's not saying that.
posted, in fact, I watched it kind of before you and I were going online. It was a video that David Barton did. And one of the things that really resonated in me is, again, he was just sort of reminding about the body of Christ. Paul talks about we're one body, Christ is the head, and we're different members. And again, we have a tendency, if we're a hand, we think everyone should be a hand. Right? You can go both ways. Like, we either think everyone should be a hand, or we have like this, I wish I wasn't a hand, right? I mean, it's one of those two things. But if we're an eye, everyone should be an eye. If we're a mouth, everyone should be loud mouths like me. And
Yes,
and
not true.
like, I think that when you're talking about this kind of context, it's important to also put up, you know, we need that cerebral studying, you know, diligent
Absolutely.
kind of personality aspect to it. We need all these different parts of the body. You're good, you're right, you're needed, and we don't in any way denigrate what you are. And but you need us too, even us kind of crazy people that go on Facebook Live and
Yes.
and kind of ramble on.
And think other people want to listen to us.
That's right. Think other people that want to listen to us. But anyway, I just kind of want to, I think it's important. It's not just sort of, laity and clergy. There's this, whatever you are, thank God that you are that,
Absolutely.
and you are needed, but don't denigrate the others, because the others are just as needed
Right.
as you. And by the way, I mean, I'm pointing at myself, because I mean, I can be a pretty gregarious, rah, everyone should be like me. The world would be a better place if everyone was like me. And then my
Well,
wife says, no, the world would not be a better place if
it,
everyone was just like you.
that's one more piece of culture you just need to get rid of.
That's right.
or cultural misuse, right? I mean, because the thing is we're really a part of culture. And I was listening to Andy Crouch last night, actually, on a topic, and he said something I hadn't heard him say before that I really liked, and I think it's really apropos for where we're at in the world right now. The worst case in a relationship, like let's just say, you're having a marital relationship with a spouse, or girlfriend, boyfriend, or you're having a bad relationship with your boss and you at work. The worst place in a relationship is where both parties basically judge and vilify the other party. They don't want to have any. They're just talking. They're just saying, that those people over there. Well, those people over there,
Yeah.
right? And if you look at the world where we are right now, I mean, Christians are doing this to the world. They're going, well, the world is just going to hell in a handbasket. And I mean, we're part of some groups, and
Yeah.
there's people that come into those groups and just want to talk about how this is a sign that the end of times is here,
Right.
because things are so bad.
Right.
And it's like, we're supposed to be loving and creating environments of grace. That's actually not helpful, right? Or accurate. But then the same thing, when the world, you look at today, the world's like, well, Christians are horrible and they just hate people and blah blah blah. And to some degree, we deserve that because we've done what we've done, right?
Well,
But it's not accurate either, and it's also not helpful,
right.
right? So neither thing is accurate or helpful. And what I think God is waiting for us to do as Christians is to get in the middle of loving and giving grace to people, even when they do think that about us. That's really what our job
Well,
is in
and
the
look,
middle of our work.
here's the reality. Okay, in this,
Mhm.
I mean, there is a distinction. There is a
Yeah,
lost in a world, a dead cohort, and then there's the born again living, and there will be a hatred. There will be an animosity. I mean, this is why Jesus said people are going to hate you, people are going to curse you. But the point is, we shouldn't accept that. Like that doesn't mean we change. That doesn't mean we disengage. That doesn't mean that we and I'm going even beyond just doing good, because I think sometimes doing good means, okay, well, I'm going to go feed the homeless guy, or we that's a whole nother top of the definition of doing good. I think is another rant for another night, but it's more
yes,
than feeding the hungry. But doing good is being your best brother, husband, employee, employer. Again, that authentic you, that best, that not just a best, but that
absolutely.
God created version of you. So
Yeah.
much more.
So so I couldn't agree with you more, right? It's not about trying to find an activity, but living in the reality that he is your life already and inviting him to participate in that, right? And so I think the thing is that besides the fact that nobody talks about this, it keeps everybody in a system that they think that the way that the world is the way that it's out in front of them. But
Yeah.
actually it's not. It's kind of it's a matrix of its own, right? And so you have to kind of get past that to be able to see it. But what I would ask you, sort of, maybe as we're wrapping up here, what is the key way? What's one or two ways from your standpoint that you actually do that? Because I think the big thing is, besides the fact that nobody's talking about it, there's very few people are saying, well, okay, how do you actually do that, right? So what's
So
your take?
I love that you're now throwing a question to me, and it's a great question. Let me tell you a couple things that I'm super excited about.
Mhm.
Um, One, I don't know if your church is done, but we're starting to do Alpha, which is apparently a big deal.
Right.
And so this is, I've heard about it for a while, but this is the first time that I've been a part of it. And one of the things that I love about the format, and it's very different than some of the other formats, is it creates a place to sort of ask some of these questions and sort of push on some of these. Because I do think that our discipleship program has typically been, here's the 10 things to go remember, go regurgitate this. So to answer your question, what are some things that I am specifically doing? One is trying to create some environments where it's safe to have these kinds of conversations. And I don't just mean loosey goosey. I mean, there's a purpose and a plan and all that kind of stuff. But I would say number one is intentionally creating environments to have spiritual conversations. Then, look, the next thing for me is, okay, now once we sort of have a little bit of framework going, how do we turn this in and apply it, directly to you and your living? And again, I mean, I mean, that's what we've kind of all been back is how can I be, my summary is how can I be uh, uh, spiritually mature and professionally excellent? Like to me, that's like the my true north that at least I am currently looking for or
Right.
currently pursuing is high level of spiritual maturity, high level of professional excellence.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I definitely think, from all the research and stuff that I've done, one of the things is, if you are going to do something, we owe it to ourselves and to God to do it with the same kind of excellence He would do. It's hard to imagine that, God who created the universe would be okay with us being substandard.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that that's definitely a thing. But then you're right. You've got to be able to. I think the other big thing, and I think it's what you're getting to in spiritual maturity, but I think it's spiritual maturity is a thing where people can go, oh well, because this is what we've been taught, right? Do your morning
Do my
devotional, do your
devotions,
quiet time.
pray every
We can
time,
we can we can think
read the
that means,
Bible in a year,
yeah, we think that can mean this list of things we have to do.
right?
But I think that
Which is
the
good. It's a
which
part.
is good. And look, if that's the place to start, nothing wrong with it, right? But I think where it really gets to get to distinctly Christian is to mean that you do it with Christ, right? That you are really surrendered to Him. The
Oh, whoa, whoa,
Israelites were
wait,
like,
hold on. You mean that it means that he is a personal relationship living in the temple and not just our
yes,
our our God that's out there? Yeah,
yeah, no, this exactly, it gets back to the identity question, right? If you think right now in your mind that Christ is up there and you're down here and you're trying to make it work for Him, you need to grow some spiritual maturity and realize that He's with you right now, present. And so that means that in every single present moment, which is the only place, by the way, in which we live, because we
right.
don't live in the future or the past, He is present with us. So what does that mean? How do you really walk with Him day to day? And you do that because, number one, you reckon it to be true. That's what Paul told you had to do, is you had to reckon that to be true. You had to
Right.
believe it, had to see that, had to receive that reality as a real possibility, not just as some intellectual concept, right? And then you have to be surrendered to His course, not your own.
Yeah.
And there will be days where that will be the challenge. Probably most days,
Yeah.
right? Is, can we, like, in
Where
other
I
words,
will
I
have
love the
I will
word
have to
surrender.
do his will, not my will. You mean there's going to be some days
Yes,
like that?
yes, yes. And so, I mean, and part of it, look, when we're pursuing our calling and we're saying, hey, you've made me be this way, we're right to actually look at how He's designed us and begin to try to walk in that.
Yeah.
But like, for instance, if you're trying to walk in that and someone's standing against you, and unless He's really telling you specifically, like, He loves people, so if you're going to like trample on some person who's in your way,
Right.
well, you're probably not going down the path of
Right.
Him that day, right?
Right.
This is where you need to be more surrendered. And so, and I would say that you should really be surrendered to creating environments of love and grace, right? Like, the role is, if you can come into the room, whatever that room is, and add more love and grace to it, if you
Well,
can value people the way He values people,
yeah.
right? If you can say, Lord, how do I intentionally be an image bearer of You to the people in this room?
Yeah.
Even if that means swallowing my pride or not getting my way or whatever, hard to do for all of us, right? But I think that that's going down the path of spiritual maturity way more than just, doing memorization and all these other things, right?
Yeah.
And again, not that those aren't good, because that's how you
Well,
learn,
I mean,
but
those are the predicates to be
right.
able to bring in love and
They're the
grace. The only
scales
way we're going to bring in love and grace is because we filled ourselves up through His
with love and
Word,
grace.
through communion, through devotion, through all of those
Yes.
things, so that we can walk into any environment and be love and grace.
Yeah. But we just got to not get confused and let Satan confuse you that, well, okay, but I'm pushing the truth here. when we're really just pushing judgment,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's, it's easy for people when they are going through the predicates to misunderstand the predicates, right?
Yeah.
It's like playing scales on the piano, but you can make really nasty sounds or you can make really wonderful music, right?
Right.
And so yeah, we gotta do those practices and those skills, but then you actually have to use them properly. And that's always going to be in his will, which is to, he just loves people unconditionally.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we're surrendered to that with him, that's a pretty good starting point.
Yeah. Well, I think this has been. I've had fun. Have you had fun,
Me
Todd?
too. This
Okay.
has been awesome.
So, if you like this conversation, you give us some likes. More importantly, give us some comments, and we'll do it again. But Todd, I know that you're posting some videos. So how do people connect with you?
Yeah, for sure. Well, certainly they can connect with me on Facebook. I'm putting some final touches on this course we're developing, and I'm about to actually do a post either later tonight or maybe tomorrow now, since it's a little late. But that will, number one, be just thanking everybody for all the participation that they gave me last month. But we'll also talk about how to take some next steps with what we've been setting up. And so, but certainly connect with me on Facebook, or you can go to toddboyum.com and send me a message there. Would love to hear from you. Love to hear your thoughts. We're really, for me, I'm super dedicated to trying to help people experience Christ in their day to day, in their work life. Not so much as, I've had a lot of questions where people have said, well, you're creating a religious course. And I'm like, not really. And I'm creating a course about work and life and how God really wants to be a part of all of that, not just about your faith time on Sundays.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really what he longs for us, is to be with him in the 7 days, not just the one.
Love it.
So,
Love it. All right, buddy. Absolute blast. Let's do this again.
so
If,
did you
if
hang
anyone
up on
liked
me,
it, we'll do it again.
John?
I'm here. Can you hear me? There we go. Absolute blast. Let's do it again.
We froze. I
We're
think you
good.
froze up there for a second.
All right.
Anyway,
I'm
so
gonna
yeah.
I'm gonna end I'm gonna end Facebook. So
Thanks everybody.
thanks
Have
everyone.
fun.
Hang on a second there, Todd.